welcome back, if that's the case, to part two of our series of our sessions on survey development and evaluation. Again, it's my pleasure to welcome Okan Bulut to the Department of Pediatrics. I mentioned to Okan earlier on that I had a lot of feedback. Both Julie and I had a lot of positive feedback on session number one. So we're looking forward to session number two, and which I'm sure is a nice complement to the first one. So with that, I'll hand it over to Okan.
All right, thank you so much, Jeff. So good morning, everyone. So welcome back. And if you are just joining us, welcome for the first time again. And I believe that we are recording this session as well. Hopefully, both of these sessions, today's session and the one from last week, will be available as a video to you later on as well. All right, so last week we talked about how to design surveys and how to create better surveys, maybe creating high quality questions. And this week I will now assume that now, let's say you collected your data using your high quality survey. Now we have some data to analyze, and that's what we are going to focus on this week in part two. So I just presented this last week as well, but if you're just joining us for the first time, this is my contact information. If you have any further questions about survey design or any other questions about like methodological problems, so that's kind of my area of expertise, feel free to just send me an email and follow our work. All right, so like I said, today's agenda will be mostly around analyzing survey data and interpreting survey findings, pretty much presenting the results. So, and just like last week's slides, I also made this week's slides available as a PDF file, and I put the links for both of them actually. So if you want to download the slides for this week and last week, feel free to just maybe take a screenshot of this, or we will share the links through the chat as well. So, and if you can't just write down the link, don't worry. So I'll be able to just copy and paste them to the chat in Zoom. All right, so let's just get started. So like I said, we will have two parts. So after part one, I will just take some time and just to answer your questions. Then we will move to a second part, and I will get more questions at the end. So we will have two Q&As basically today. All right, so when it comes to analyzing survey data, actually, there are several questions that we have to think about. So first of all, what type of variables do we actually have in our survey data? So do we have some quantitative variables? Do we have some qualitative variables, or both? Typically, that's the scenario, most likely scenario. We will talk about that. So what are the possible options for analyzing survey data? So what are the typical statistical and qualitative data analysis methods, and what are the software programs available to analyze survey data? I will list some of those. And who is the target audience for the findings of your survey? That's very critical when it comes to analyzing survey data, because you can analyze your data using a highly complex method, but if you're just presenting your results to general public or like a non-technical audience, then it doesn't matter actually in that case. And finally, how do you plan to present your findings? Like, is it going to be a thesis dissertation? Is it a publication or technical report? Is it a poster presentation? Depending on what type of venue you are targeting, the content of your survey findings will also change. The format will just change. We will talk about that, or maybe you will use a table, or you will use some figures to convey the message that you are hoping to give. So going back to the types of variables, so we have two types of variables in survey data, typically quantitative data, which is typically less common actually. So all the demographic questions that will ask about age, income, height, weight, or time-related variables, like how many years, for how many years have you been working as a doctor, as a nurse, as a dentist, as a teacher. So, and those are the questions that you will get some quantitative variables in return, or counts of things, such as like how many books do you have, how many children, how many family members, how many credits have you earned so far, stuff like that. So, and in fact, in surveys, we do not have many questions like this. So if you are asking a very brief survey to get to know people, some demographic questions, like very simple survey, in that case, you will have some quantitative data, but most of the time in surveys, we get qualitative data, and those are typically nominal categories such as gender, your ethnicity, race, or which province you are just living in, and things like that. Or it could be ordered categories or ordinal variables, such as level of satisfaction, agreement, or frequency of a behavior, so such as like never, sometimes, very often, almost always, something like this, or strongly disagree, agree, strongly agree, like an agreement type of variable. And you can also have some open-ended questions for people to describe their thoughts and comments and give you additional feedback. So they all give you qualitative data. So, and you may think that, hey, so do we not assign some numbers to those questions? Like one, such as, let's say, strongly disagree, 2 is disagree, 3 is agree, and 4 is strongly agree. So is it not quantitative? And my short answer to that question is that no, it is not. So, and we will come back to that in the next few slides. But so treat those numbers as like qualitative labels rather than real numbers in the context of surveys. So again, like our time is really short, so I cannot dive into a lot of statistical techniques and methods to analyze this. So feel free to just send me an email if you want further feedback on it. And again, I strongly recommend you to consider EDPY 504, Survey Design and Implementation in winter. So to learn more about this type of things. But today at least I will give you a brief overview of what type of analysis or statistical techniques will be available to us when we analyze survey data. So for quantitative variables such as age, such as height, weight, and years of experience, things like that, you have lots of options to use when it comes to describing your data sets, such as like mean, as an index of average, or as an indicator of average, or median, especially for skewed data, it's much it's stronger than mean. Standard deviation, minimum, maximum, you can provide the range, you can provide the variance. They are all possible. But when it comes to qualitative variables, actually the options are limited, more limited. So in this case, the nominal variables such as, let's say, gender, if you are asking questions in a kind of like an ordinal fashion or nominal fashion, so you will be giving people options to say like, hey, how many of those gender categories do we have? So just give me counts or proportions or frequencies around that, or percentages. For ordinal variables, it is the same deal. So we either report frequencies, proportions, median or mode, not the mean. So why? So again, I will just show you that very shortly soon, but like I said, in qualitative variables, those labels that we assign to survey questions are actually labels. They are not like real numbers. So it is not meaningful to take an average of those values and report them as an average level of satisfaction in it, or average level of agreement, for example. So something to avoid, so that's what I was just talking about so far, and ordinal variables such as Likert scale questions should not be average or summed. So you will see a lot of people, and again, that's a very common practice, but it is, I would just say openly, so it is wrong. So ordinal variables should not be averaged or should not be summed. So when you see people getting a total survey score or just summing up ordinal variables and averaging them, so they are not necessarily good practices, because ordinal variables are not necessarily equally distant from each other. So let me give you an example. This is what we assume. So strongly disagree, agree, and strongly agree. We label them as like 1, 2, 3, 4. So assuming that they are equally distant from each other, meaning that selecting this strongly disagree, agree, and strongly agree, they are equally likely for people. But in reality, that may not be the case. So we typically ask questions that are pushing people to choose either negative or positive options, meaning that selecting, for example, agree and strongly agree could be much easier than selecting disagree and strongly disagree for a given question. So in that case, so even if you assign 1, 2, 3, 4, assuming that they are equally distant from each other, those options may not be equally distant from each other. So taking the average, first of all, will violate that assumption that you just made, so they're equally distant. And also, if you get something like, let's say you're averaging the responses for a given question like this, so you find 2.5. What does that tell you? So people disagree or agree? So this is not a continuum. So those labels are kind of arbitrary, actually. So if I assign 1, 2, 3, 4, and if somebody comes in and says, I will assign 1, 7, 11, and 17, those two are equally arbitrary in that case. So that's why I'm just telling you that you should not treat those labels that you are putting into the questions as quantitative variables. They are actually qualitative variables. And that's why taking the mean doesn't mean much. So I definitely recommend you to consider or focus on the median values for this type of questions rather than the mean itself. Because again, just going back to the example I gave you, so if you take the average of a question like this, so if you find 2.5, 2.6 as the average, what does that tell you? Do people really agree on average or disagree, or do they strongly disagree? We don't know. So that average actually doesn't tell you much. So what type of analysis can you do when it comes to survey data? So you can have lots of item and scale analysis techniques. First of all, you can check the response frequency. So that is very, very helpful when it comes to analyzing and understanding survey data. So first of all, you can take a look at the response categories to see if each response option was utilized sufficiently. So that's very important. If people are mostly selecting one response option dominantly, so maybe that's not a good question to use in your survey data analysis. You can take a look at the skewness in the results. So sometimes, like I said, people tend to push their results or choices back to towards more like positive responses. So you will see lots of people selecting, let's say, strongly agree and agree in an ordinal type of question rather than those negative options. So in that case, that extreme skewness may just give you some ideas about like how functional that question is actually. And also you can take a look at the level of missing data. We typically say that level of missing data should be less than 10% for each response option, or sorry, for each question. So in that case, we do not want more than 10% missingness per question. Otherwise, we are missing a lot of people, and that question may not give you enough information to rely on. So if you have more than 10%, what do you do? Do you get rid of the question? Not necessarily, but there are some other options such as either imputing data or just being more careful about interpreting that item because there's lots of missingness. And another thing to consider is that who really missed that item? Was it really random? Or people just skip that question intentionally just because of their, let's say, ethnic background, racial background, gender, or something else. Some people may find the question more sensitive than others, so that's why they may have skipped that. So in that case, you lost some people from a specific subgroup of your target population rather than like a random group of people. So those are all kind of like tricky things to think about. Let me show you an example. Here's a question. It says, I enjoy learning mathematics. And the response options are strongly disagree, disagree, agree, and strongly agree. I strongly agree. So in that case, I will show you a plot that comes from this question. It's a bar chart or bar plot. So you just see the frequencies or percentages of each option. So we see that the positive options are more dominant in that case. Nearly like 58% of the people just selected either agree or strongly agree. In that case, 10% missingness. Not too bad, but it is something to think about. So it's for some reason, 10% of the people skip that question on the survey. And that's something to reflect on, like why this is really happening and who are these people who really skip the answers. So you may want to take a look at who really just skipped those questions, depending on their answers to the other questions or demographic questions, basically. Again, this is kind of like a good example that the options are utilized enough. So if I had seen an example such as, let's say, strongly disagree was never used, 1 or 2% of the people, or strongly, or I just disagree or strongly disagree, they were not utilized, only positive response options were selected. So in that case, you would just say, hey, this is more like a consensus type of question rather than asking people whether they disagree or agree, because nearly everybody selected either agree or strongly agree. So in that case, how useful that question is, I'm not really sure. Maybe that would not be too useful for your to your analysis. But I would say that in this case, it is not too bad. So yes, we see some skewness towards positive response options, but it is not terrible. It is not terrible at this point. So as I was just saying earlier, so the missingness is one thing to think about. And that's exactly what I'm highlighting here. 10% is kind of like a threshold. The second thing is that after we just check these basics, we just try to group some items and then create some subscales within our survey. And those subscales will tell us more about the content areas that we are hoping to understand in this case. So in this example, I'm just giving you more questions from the same survey. So you have already seen question number 1, I enjoy learning mathematics. There are also questions in the same survey still focusing on enjoying math. So such as I wish I have not to study math. Mathematics is boring, kind of like a negative item. In this case, it's going to be reverse coded. I learn interesting things in mathematics class. I like mathematics. I think it is important to do well in mathematics. Kind of like your positive, maybe you would say attitudes towards mathematics or enjoying math. So that's the general concept of these items, to see if those items really come together really nicely. So you need to check the correlations among the items. So one way to do this is to create a correlation table of this of the 6 questions. You can get a 6x6 correlation table to check that. However, as the number of items increases, getting or just eyeballing those numbers will be more difficult. So I always prefer data visualizations in that case, and I will show you one example of this. So this is called, like, some people call it heat map, some people call it correlation matrix plot. So this is a plot that you can create. I will just give you the name of the program in the next few slides. So if I correlate 6 questions together, it will give me a figure like this. And the green color represents positive correlation and the red color represents negative correlation. In this case, I can tell you that all of my questions are positively correlated. That's a good thing. So, and also questions are kind of moderately or highly correlated with each other. That's another good thing. So you can see some light green areas indicating low correlations, 0.2, 0.24. They are still not too bad. So probably around like 0.1, 0.2 should be kind of our threshold. Still, I'm expecting correlations above at this point to say that, hey, these questions are kind of relevant to each other, or they're associated with each other. In that case, in this particular example, I would say that I have 6 questions. I assume that theoretically they all measure enjoy mathematics, and the correlation plot metrics, correlation metrics plot gives me that confirmation that yes, all these questions are positively correlated with each other. Probably they are measuring the same concept. So I can treat those questions as a subscale within my survey. You can also check check other indices to understand whether your questions should come together as a subscale. So one index to look at is called reliability, or sometimes you will see it as internal consistency, or most famous term to call it in the field is a Cronbach's alpha, the alpha coefficient. So in this case, if I have 6 questions and I can get a reliability or coefficient alpha value for these 6 questions, so that coefficient alpha value should be at least 0.6 or 0.7 or above to conclude that, hey, my scale or my questions are actually measuring the same thing, more or less. So they are consistent with each other. So that's an index of consistency or alignment. So in this particular example, our coefficient alpha value or Cronbach's alpha value is 0.86, which is quite high. So the top value is 1, the smallest value is 0. So the values closer to 1 will indicate high reliability. In this case, my value for this particular subscale, 0.86, is quite high. I can confidently say that my internal consistency or reliability of this 6 questions as a group of questions is quite high. The other thing that I will just recommend to look at is this called item rest correlation. So this is the correlation between each individual item and the remaining items on your subscale on your survey. So in that case, we want those correlations to be high because each item should be moderately or highly correlated with the rest of the items on your survey. This is what this item rest correlation refers to. So your threshold should be at this 0.2. So we want each item to be correlated with the rest of the other items or questions on your survey, and the threshold for this correlation should be at this 0.2. In this particular example, you can see that all of the correlations are really high. Only question 6 seems to have kind of like a low correlation 0.37, but it is not too bad. It is still pretty decent and acceptable. So I can say that all the 6 questions that you are seeing here, they contribute to my scale or group of items that that seem to measure enjoying mathematics construct. All right, so these are quantitative options, and there are other techniques, and there are many other techniques that I can actually talk about. Obviously, within 1 hour, it's not sufficient. It's not good enough to explain all of these. But if you have more complex type of quantitative data to analyze or ordinal variables, just shoot me an email. There are lots of options to focus on, to utilize in the context of survey research. So in addition to quantitative data, I will also briefly talk about qualitative responses. So what if you have some qualitative responses to focus on? So then what do you do? So you can do some kind of like thematic analysis of your open-ended responses. In that case, it is all about like generating some initial codes or labels after reading all of the responses, searching some common themes or patterns across those responses, and defining and naming each theme. So this is more like a qualitative data analysis technique. So you will go through qualitative responses. You can code them and you can categorize them independently. Typically, 2 researchers will do it independently, and they will compare their codes or categorizations together after their initial work. So you will create some common patterns in the responses to see what type of things people have said in generally, and what those common themes, how they could be named. When you start presenting the results, people will want to know what those themes are, what they mean. So you will need to just provide some definitions or naming for each theme that you just created based on open-ended responses. What else? So one helpful technique to understand open-ended responses, to dump all the responses into a program where you can create a word cloud. So that is very helpful, because a word cloud will tell you which words were most frequently used or said or written in the responses. So that will give you an idea about what are the dominant responses or words or themes in your responses. So that's a very useful technique. And finally, if you're more like a data science oriented person, there are new techniques to analyze open-ended responses, which I'm actually using right now for some surveys. Those are text mining techniques, so such as you can use something called sentiment analysis to extract emotions from the text. So that tells you a little bit more about like whether people were just saying positive things or negative things, whether they were just saying hopeful things, or they were just describing their anger or let's say happiness or trust or credibility and things like that. So you can just analyze the sentiments out of your text using text mining and using this kind of text mining analysis. Another technique to use as an alternative to thematic analysis of open-ended responses is called topic modeling. In that case, you can use topic modeling as a data-driven technique to categorize your topics or themes or patterns in your textual data and create some topics out of it. So compared to the first bullet point that I described over here, so that was more like a manual one. So you just sit down, go over all the text by yourself. So this is more like a data-driven technique. You will use a software program to tell you what type of themes may exist in your data set, in your text data, textual data, and you can take a look at those topics or themes later on. So I will give you some names of some open access programs. I'm a big supporter of this type of programs. I don't really like to give our students like a name of like a commercial program that so they have to pay for it. So I'm always looking for really strong open access programs that we can always benefit, download whenever we want, wherever we want, and use them freely. So these are the good programs that I can recommend. So the graphs and analysis that I show you so far comes from the first program that I'm listing here. Is called JMovi. So I think the creators of this program put their initials like Jonathan, Adrian, or something like that. So they created this interesting name for this program called JMovi. So it's a very capable program. So all the things that I showed you so far, like graphs, summary, statistics, so they all came from that program. JASP is very similar to JMovi as well. That's also free. It has a very nice graphical user interface. So very easy to use, just like JMovi. Almost those two programs are nearly identical. PSPP is an interesting program. It's free, so it may sound like SPSS. So it is really SPSS, but it is the free version of SPSS. So like even the letters were just like reversed, like rather than SPSS, it is called PSPP. It is very similar to SPSS, but it is free version of it. I would recommend you to take a look at that one. It is very good for running some simple analysis with your data. Very, very capable program that I can recommend. Finally, the last one is called R. If you are familiar with R, so it's a programming language, so it is open-ended, open access program. So actually JMOV and JASP, they are using R in the background, but they give you a nice graphical user interface. So you can click on some buttons, see your analysis. But in R, it is not like that. You need to type your codes. You need to run things by literally typing your codes and executing those codes in R. That's what I use in my analysis rather than like JASP and JMOV most of the time. I like typing my codes, and there are also more options available that way. But again, if you are not familiar with R at all, so definitely JMOV and JASP are really good options because again, they are running R in the background without having you to type anything as a code basically. So it's a very good, those are very good alternatives. The other programs that you can obviously use, there are lots of commercial programs. The ones that I use typically is called, they are called, obviously Microsoft Excel is one of them. I often use Microsoft Excel to summarize data, to create a quick graph or kind of like a visualization. And all those visualizations that you create in Microsoft Excel, they maintain their quality when you copy and paste them into a paper, into a presentation. So that's a good thing. And it's so easy to create graphics and visualizations in Excel anyway. So that's what I like about it. IBM SPSS Statistics, that's what I was talking about earlier, and Minitab, those are commercial programs, but they are very easy to use. So if you have the license for those, so I can recommend you to check those out.
Oh, you hurt when you do that to me.
I'm hearing some background noise. Can you just mute yourselves? I just see some conversation going on. All right. Okay, so for qualitative data, there are still some programs available. One thing that I want to highlight is that sometimes we get the impression that we will download or find a qualitative data analysis software program, it will analyze the data for us. It is not true. So unlike quantitative software programs, qualitative software programs, they do not analyze your data. So they help you categorize your data, code your data, compare your data, and things like that, rather than analyzing your data. So it is you analyzing the data rather than the program itself. I listed a bunch of programs over here. So there are open access programs. If you want to download them, you can definitely go ahead. And again, R and Python and a couple of other code-based programs are good alternatives if you are enjoying typing your codes, obviously, if you're a good programmer. Otherwise, the programs that I listed over here, they are very good alternative open access programs. So all the blue lines underlined text that you are seeing in the slides, they are actually URLs. So when you download the slides, you can definitely click on them and they will just open up the website for each of these programs. So that's why you can just definitely rely on these links. And as you can see, like the underlying URL already shows up as I move my cursor or mouse on this blue text, blue color text anyway. There are a couple of other commercial programs available. So I put the links. So the good thing is that our university is providing discounted prices for those programs. If you want to buy like NVivo and Atlas and things like that, so you can definitely buy them at a discounted rate, so a discounted price. So they are kind of available to us as students, faculty members, and other people on campus, so they can download them with a better price. So my preference is always for on open access programs, but when it comes to qualitative data, unfortunately, the commercial programs are much more capable. So you have to rely on them eventually rather than just using only open access programs. I think that's pretty much it of my first section. So I hope that I summarized enough of the data analysis techniques. But now I will just take a break and take your questions if you have any. Either you can just turn your microphone on and just say it, or type your questions in the chat box. Questions, any comments about survey data analysis or things that we have discussed so far, talked about so far? I will monitor the chat in case I'm seeing anything in the chat.
Okay, it's Jeff.
Go ahead, Jeff. Yeah.
Just a quick question. I might have missed it about subscale development. The example you showed had 6 questions, and you showed the correlations, and it seemed like all the questions sort of fit together. Is there a sweet spot? Like, is 6 sort of the common number of questions that you'd have for a subscale, or how do you? I mean, how would one know starting from square one how many they should strive to include in a subscale?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question, and that is actually something that we discussed last week as well. I mentioned that statistically we need at least 3 questions to create a subscale. That's a statistical thing, though. So is having 3 questions enough? Probably not. So in that case, I will just say that the sweet spot is definitely depends on how high quality your questions are. So in the past, I've created subscales, and we just use those subscales for further analysis, such as regression, ANOVA, and things like that. Even 5 questions should be good enough. But the point is that each question should be working well, so meaning that they need to function very well. So all those questions should distinguish people sufficiently. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing is that when you just put those questions together, they should be aligned in a nice way, just like I just showed that in that example. Probably I would say that my typical threshold in my own analysis is typically like minimum 4 to 5 questions as I group the items together. Like I said, statistically, 3 questions are enough to create a subscale, but my preference is always around at least like 4 to 5 questions minimum, and 4 to 5 high quality questions. The more is better in general, but sometimes the more questions you add, you may realize that you are just changing the definition of that construct. So some of the questions that you keep adding, they may not be working well with the rest of the items. So the key point is to keep the most, maybe the highest quality questions and fewest number of items as well all together. So maybe 5 to 6 really core questions that describe whatever you are hoping to measure. In that case, it was all about enjoying mathematics. So let's say these are the 6 questions that I came up with from my survey, and those are the strong indicators of enjoying mathematics. So in that case, I can say that I will group them together. And I still looked at the data to confirm that theoretical assumption, and I just said that, hey, I have 6 questions. They seem to belong to the same scale. They are highly correlated with each other. And I looked at that item rest correlation to see if each correlation is sufficiently correlated with the rest of the items or questions on that subscale. That's also another indicator that I use. So there are multiple steps to take, obviously, but I would say that, just to give you a short answer, probably at least 4 to 5 questions should be the minimum. So I do not like survey subscales that people create based on 2 questions. That's a big no. 1 question, definitely a no. But 3 questions, 4 questions, it is tricky because you can still measure things with only 3 or 4 questions, but they have to be really good questions at the end. So think about it that way. So maybe I can give you a hint really quick. So if you have 3 questions, assume that 1 question will measure whatever you are measuring, low levels of that construct. So let's say enjoying mathematics. So 1 question should be suitable for people who are not enjoying mathematics that much. Another question should be for people who are enjoying mathematics. And another question should be for people who are enjoying mathematics a lot. So in that case, I should have 3 different questions to cover that continuum, low, medium, and high of whatever I'm measuring in that case. The more questions I have, the more clearly or reliably I can measure that continuum, actually. So that's why adding more questions is always better. So that's why I just think that typically 5 to 6 is kind of like a minimum number that I typically use in my analysis. So the more information, the more questions you will have, obviously, the more information you will get from your subscale, and the more reliable it's going to be. So the reliability index or coefficient alpha that I showed you earlier, it will increase as you add more questions, because the more questions you add, the more information you get. The more information you get, the more reliable your scale or subscale becomes. So that's kind of like the general guideline around it. Hopefully I just answered your question.
Yeah, great. Thank you. No,
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
Any other further questions about survey data analysis, at least the things that we have discussed so far? All right, I'm not hearing anything. So in that case, I will move to the second part, which will focus on interpreting the survey findings in that case. So when it comes to presenting or survey results, obviously we have two options, either tables or figures, and each one is useful in a certain setting, but not in others. So that's why we have to think about what is the best format of presenting our data to others, so we can help them understand our survey findings better, right? Or more easily. So I suggest that you prefer tables or use tables if the table is going to be used to look up some individual values. In other words, if people really care about the individual values you got from your survey, that's very, in that case, table is the only way to go. If precise information is required, meaning that people want to know exactly what happened in the survey, so in that case, tables are useful. And if you are planning to summarize your data, if you want to provide the original values, if you want to present them together, so in that case, tables are still good. But again, I'm more like a visual learner. I enjoy data visualizations more than tables, especially in conference presentations, even in technical reports and publications. So, and the figures are much better to reveal relationships among a set of questions or a set of values. So you can summarize multiple questions together by creating a really nice figure. And in that case, it is better than just seeing lots of numbers in a table. And not everybody is really good at reading lots of values or quantitative numbers in tables, especially a long, complex table. And if you want to highlight some relationships between two or more variables, again, figures are way to go in that case. So let me give you a table example. So like, what type of table would you just use when you just create a survey? So this is a very simple table, and I will show you what is really special about this table. So if you are presenting your survey results in a table, make your table as clear as possible, meaning that people, without relying on any other further information, they should be able to understand the table just by reading everything you provided from the table heading, the table title, everything in the table, notes, everything else, everything like I'm presenting over here. So right now, I'm just saying that in this table, you are seeing the median scores for questions for the social engagement scale. I'm telling you which survey, which scale it is, what I'm presenting. These are the median scores. They are not the mean scores. Like I said, don't present the mean scores for your ordinal items. So this is what it is. And in this case, I'm just giving you some notes, and I just explained that this was the sample size for students who passed or failed the exam. This is what the table really gives you, like a breakdown of the results based on fail, pass, and fail. And I also tell you that some of the questions were negatively written. So that's why this is how you need to interpret them. A low median indicates a positive student behavior. So I'm giving you some heads up about multiple things. Like there's a negative question, you need to interpret it in the other way around. I have some questions, and like all the information that you need to understand this table, they are already in the table. So you don't need any further text or explanation around it. So that's what we want when we just summarize survey results using a table. So these are the tables that you should avoid, a table with a single row. And when I see this type of things, and I'm like, why do we even have a table with a single row? Yes, it is presenting the information across multiple years and for different settings like telephone versus sitting inside panel, things like that. But I could easily just mention those things in the text, just saying that 77% of the people from 2014 and 80% of the people from 2015 just did it that way or completed the survey. Just avoid this type of tables, like very simple single row tables, and just type your information inside the text or say it if you're presenting it, rather than presenting the results in a table like this. All right, so like I said, I like figures, I like data visualization, so that's why I prefer visualizing survey results rather than creating tables. And obviously, when it comes to data visualization, there are lots of things to think about. So the colors that you are using, the shapes, the size of the shapes that you are using, even the bar charts, the thickness of those things, the font types, font size, font color, everything will definitely help you convey a different message when it comes to visualizing your data. So almost like 2 years ago, back in 2019, I gave a workshop around how to create better visualizations around survey data with survey questions. I put the link over here. So if you click on this My Workshop Notes, so it will help you download the PDF slides that I used at that time. So they explain like what type of size, colors, color combinations, font, and things like that you should be using when it comes to presenting or visualizing your survey questions. Another point to mention, avoid complex figures. Like complex figures, sometimes we just tend to create complex things to present information. We think that the more complex the figures become, the better they are. It is not true. Basically, when I see figures like this is my impression. Like I'm just like, what is this figure just telling me? So why is this even like 3D? So why am I just learning from this figure? So did we even need this figure? So in this particular presentation or publication. So we should just avoid complex figures and then present the results as simply as possible so that the message that you are giving, you are hoping to give it, this will be conveyed more easily. So in that case, the essence of this data visualization element or discussion is that the less is more. So I will just show you one example. So that's a very nice example of how you can simplify a bar chart, just making things really, really simple, straightforward, just to highlight the point that you want to highlight. So we started with a very colorful image. So as you can see, after each round, a part of the plot is gone. So now it is becoming simpler, easier to understand, easier to digest. Again, the less is more, very good. Like this is the first one and this is the last one. So, and again, I definitely prefer less colorful, not necessarily less colorful, but let's say simpler designs when it comes to visualizations, because the more colors you present, the more confusing they become. So that's why I would suggest that take a look at the data visualization guidelines when you start creating figures. So what kind of figures or charts are more common with survey data? Bar charts. So you cannot use histograms, you cannot use other types of interesting plots that we would normally use with quantitative data. Instead, your best shot is pretty much like bar charts. So in this particular example, you are seeing 4 different questions that I'm presenting. So, and each question is colored by the response options: strongly agree, strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. And for each option, I could have given you just the bars and then force you to look at the width or height of those bars exactly. So, but in this case, I'm giving you the numbers as well for you to have a precise idea about like what's going on with each response option. This is what I'm recommending you to follow as well, because again, when you just give people bar charts and when you skip that slide really quickly, it is so hard to see what's going on. So still provide the numbers just to support your visualization as much as possible. Here's another version of it. These are called stack bar charts. Compared to the previous one, actually, the general guideline around stack bar charts is that these are harder to understand. So people just prefer or should prefer this type of charts rather than stack bar charts, because again, unless you put the numbers just like I did in this slide, it is harder to just understand like what is the height of those orange bars, blue bars, and gray bars, and yellow bars. So which one is bigger, which one is smaller? So either provide the numbers just like I did, or just avoid this type of charts as you are presenting things based on your surveys. A couple of extra tools to make some great figures. Obviously, I mentioned that already. Microsoft Excel has lots of nice tools, and I typically use Excel whenever I need to create a quick figure. So like I said earlier, I use R to create figures, analyze data and things like that. But creating a really nice quality figure, a high quality figure in R takes a lot of time, but in Excel it's much easier still compared to those programs. So I would recommend Excel as your first stop, basically. JMOV program that I showed you earlier, so it is capable of creating bar charts, scatter plots, box plots, correlation metrics plots, the green correlation heat map that I just showed you earlier. So JMOV created that one. So it is very nice. The plots are not very customizable, but they're really high quality graphs, so you can copy paste them to your publication presentation easily. And I listed a couple of other options over here. There are websites where you can import your data unless it contains any sensitive information. Obviously, you can import your data and create some figures using the using a web browser. So these are very nice, highly capable programs to create high quality figures and graphics using survey data. So, and I think that's kind of like my last point in the second part. But again, I think we have some time left, so that's a good thing. So I'll be happy to take further questions about data visualizations, presenting your results, interpreting them, and things like that. So if you have any specific questions about this section or anything that we have discussed up until this point, basically. So we can open the room for discussion, so we can take some questions about these concepts again, like either analysis, visualization. I know that probably it is a lot of information within 45 minutes or 50 minutes, but again, believe me, so it is even beyond that. So it would take probably several lectures or days to cover that content even in more detail. But basically, these are the most essential pieces or most essential information when it comes to analyzing survey data, visualizing survey data, and presenting the results. So, questions from the group, comments, any particular questions about if you have your own survey, if you're analyzing a survey right now. So if you have a relevant question, please feel free to ask that one as well. So I will stop sharing my screen. So Jeff, I don't hear anything so from the group. So if there are any comments, questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, just to say, Okan, that was a really nice compliment to your first presentation. Nice to have you run through some specific examples of, what questions look like, and the visualization, the sequence of going through that cascade of what you start with and what you end with. It's a nice example of trying to keep things clean and simple. So we had a session earlier in the week around writing and trying to write clearly and effectively and simply, and it sort of mirrors the discussion we had around writing, and generally keeping things simple and direct is the best way.
Yeah, totally. I think the same principle applies to developing surveys as well. Keep your survey questions really brief, short, clean. And when it comes to presenting the results, the same principle still applies. Just keep things as simple as possible and highlight the thing that you want to highlight, because sometimes I go to conferences, people just put a colorful graph, beautiful graph, but there are 10 colors on it. I'm like, which one should I focus on? And do colors really help me understand what is the most important point in this figure? Probably not. And I think there's some evidence from cognitive psychology and other areas too. So I think anything beyond 4 different colors is so hard to understand, like basically digest in our brains. So it becomes quite distracting when you have more than 4 colors in one slide, basically. So it's good to just stick to that rule and just present things as nicely as possible, but still just using probably fewer colors and still highlighting good things or important things in the meantime.
Yeah. I see we have a question here, Okan. Can you please give some idea about graphical abstract?
So graphical abstract, so I just want to ask a question around this. So graphical abstract for presentation, for publication, or something like this. So can you a little bit elaborate on that one? A little bit more explanation around, like, because when I think of graphical abstracts, I can think of several things.
And Sabrina, if it's easier to unmute and just not type it, that's an option for you as well.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Yeah, I'm just thinking about like, I want to express my data analysis or method, like the whole scenario in a graphical abstract. So I'm just starting my PhD. So I don't have any idea about the graphical abstract. So like the whole story, how can I present in an abstract format? Like if you could give me some idea.
Sure. So I've started seeing this, I think now I know what you mean. So I've started seeing lots of journals recently, especially, they are requiring or they are recommending people to submit a graphical abstract. Probably that's also something that you're asking about. So graphical abstracts are good, but just like, so sometimes in journals, you will see that at the beginning, they will have 5 or 6 points to highlight what their main findings are. So when you read those bullet points, you understand what that article is all about. So your graphical abstract should follow the same kind of principle. Basically, you should probably highlight the most important finding of your survey, of your study. Just provide a plot that really highlights what you actually just found. I wouldn't recommend presenting or combining multiple figures together, but whatever finding is the key finding for your study, probably one figure, maybe your figure layers or facets, as we call them, like maybe a figure by gender, a figure by ethnicity, maybe different layers. Still, that's also helpful. In that case, just like I showed you in the slides, to just create a simple figure as much as possible, as simple as possible, and highlight that main finding, the biggest finding of your study. Because sometimes when you try to create multiple messages from a single figure, that becomes quite complex, and people get lost in the colors, shapes, sizes, fonts. That becomes more confusing than being kind of like descriptive in that case. So you are literally just giving them less content by presenting more. So in that case, my suggestion would be that pick the most important finding from your study and present it as a graph, whatever graph is most suitable. And again, if it is a survey data, probably a bar graph is your best shot, because those are the most common graphs, obviously. But depending on what type of data you are presenting, again, if it's a quantitative data, so histograms, scatter plots, line charts, we use them in surveys too, so they could be pretty useful. But whatever is again, you are presenting, so if somebody looks at that figure, they should be able to understand what do you mean with that. So like, hey, oh, I see that there's a big difference between group A and group B. Oh, I see that these two questions are highly relevant, meaning that if somebody enjoys math, they are more likely to attend in-person classes. I'm just making this up. So something like this. David just asked a question. So would you please help share the link to your workshop notes and the data visualization as you recommended just now? Definitely. So actually what I will do is that I will share the links to these documents, and the links to that survey is in the PDF as well. So let me just paste the links over here before I forget. And let me also look up that link that I just showed you. Maybe I can open it up in my computer really quickly, and I'll just send you the link. All right, so yep, I just opened it over here. And those are the workshop links, the workshop notes that I was talking about. This is the last one. Yeah. So the first two links, they will help you download the PowerPoints that we used this week and last week. And the last link that I shared will be those workshop notes that I just mentioned in my presentation. So like I said, I presented that 2 years ago with a decent group of people, like educators and other people at the CSSE conference in Vancouver. So that was the very last conference that I attended in person. So good memories.
All right, any final questions or comments for Okan?
And again, I just want to thank you, Jeff, again, for organizing this event, and for everybody who attended this week and also last week. So again, if you have any further questions about what we discussed this week and last week, feel free to just shoot me an email. I'll be happy to answer further questions on that one. But like I said, this is just the beginning, obviously, but I think it will give you still a solid baseline to start with.
Well, thank you again for taking time to share with our department. It's clear you've got great resources to share with us, great expertise, and I know there's a lot of good takeaways that we can take from this. So thank you very much. And one point for everybody who, before you sign off, just so you know, you'll be receiving an email from Julie, the research office, in the next little while to evaluate or give some feedback on Okan's presentation and suggestions for future sessions. And just so you know, we were a bit stressed about whether we should send out an evaluation, given that these 2 sessions were all about evaluation. So Okan was kind enough to share one with us, which we've tailored a little bit. So we'll be sending that out shortly. So we welcome your feedback. But with that, I think we can sign off. And again, Okan, thank you so much. It was our pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's my pleasure.
All right. Thanks, everybody.